My daughter forgot my birthday 5 times in a row but constantly posted her stepdad on his birthday, saying he is the best gift her mom gave her. I ignored all the time until I overheard her on a phone call with her mom, saying she wished I wasn't in her life because her stepdad was an upgrade of me. What happened next will shock you. I will tell you everything. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Selena Rodriguez from Texas. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. I always thought fatherhood would be the one constant in my life that couldn't be taken away from me. Jobs could change, friendships could fade, relationships could fall apart, but being a dad? That was supposed to be the one role I could count on until my last breath. When her mother and I divorced, I promised myself I'd never let our daughter feel like she had a broken family. I worked overtime to keep our lives steady, school drop-offs, packed lunches, late-night science projects. Even when I was bone-tired from work, I'd sit cross-legged on her bedroom floor, reading Goodnight Moon for the 100th time because she'd insist the ending didn't feel right without my voice. I thought love, shown consistently and without conditions, would be enough to make her feel anchored to me no matter how life changed. Her mother remarried a few years after we split. I'll be honest, at first, I was relieved. She had found someone who could help share the burden of raising a teenage girl. I thought a stepdad could be a bonus, a second source of guidance and care. In those early months, when my daughter would talk about how cool he was, I swallowed my pride and smiled. I told myself it was healthy for her to have more people in her corner. But slowly, those conversations started to change tone. She began comparing us. Little jabs at how he was more fun, how he understood her better, how he got her humor. At first, I laughed it off, thinking, she's just going through a phase. What I didn't see then was the quiet erosion of my place in her life, one tiny crack at a time. The first time she forgot my birthday, I brushed it off. I figured it was teenage distraction, homework, friends, maybe even the awkwardness of being reminded that she had to celebrate separately with 2 households. I didn't mention it to her, didn't make a big deal. I even bought her favorite takeout that night, telling myself the gesture would be more important than the date. She thanked me absent-mindedly, scrolling on her phone, and that was that. The next year, it happened again. This time, I noticed her phone lighting up with notifications, her mother posting a smiling photo of her, and the stepdad with a caption about how he was the best gift their family could have. I saw dozens of comments from friends and relatives congratulating them, while my phone sat silent. I told myself again, she's young. She'll come around. By the 3rd year, the hurt had settled into something heavier. I started wondering if maybe it wasn't forgetfulness at all. Maybe she was deliberately ignoring it. I'd spend the day pretending it didn't matter, but at night, when I was alone, I'd scroll through her social media. There it would be. Another carefully crafted post about her stepdad's birthday, complete with a glowing tribute and hashtags about how much he meant to her. I never said anything because I didn't want to seem jealous. The truth was, I was jealous, not of the man, but of what he represented, her choosing someone else over me. The 4th and 5th years, I stopped expecting anything. My birthdays became like any other day, coffee in the morning, work, a quiet dinner alone. I didn't tell my friends or coworkers. I didn't want the awkward pity or the forced happy birthdays. And each time, I reminded myself of that promise I made years ago, to never let her feel abandoned. So I swallowed the lump in my throat and carried on. That's the thing about being a parent. You keep showing up, even when your own heart feels like it's being slowly whittled down to nothing. I remember one evening, around her stepdad's birthday, we were sitting in my living room. She was scrolling on her phone, smiling at something, and I asked, "What's got you grinning like that?" She looked up and said, "Oh, just reading the comments on my post for him. Everyone loves him. He's the best gift Mom ever gave me." She said it so casually, like it was a fact carved into stone. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and walked into the kitchen to busy myself with dishes I didn't need to wash. I could feel the words pressing against my throat, but I forced them back. I told myself, "Don't start a fight. she's still your little girl. But that night, for the first time, I began to wonder if I still held that title in her heart. Even when my feelings were bruised, I tried to be present. I drove her to college tours, bought her supplies she needed, and kept my weekends open in case she wanted to spend time together. But the time she gave me felt thinner each year. Conversations became shorter, texts went unanswered for days, and when we were together, her attention seemed somewhere else, on her phone, with her friends, or on stories about her stepdad. Still, I kept going, thinking that if I held on long enough, maybe she'd realize I had been her anchor all along. Looking back now, I see that I was holding on to an image of us that only existed in my memory, not in her reality. The truth is, by the time that phone call came, the one that would change everything, I was already carrying years of quiet disappointment. But I still didn't think it would break us completely. I thought I could keep taking the hits, keep absorbing the little wounds, because that's what a parent does. I thought the bond between father and daughter was unbreakable, no matter how strained. I didn't know that a single sentence, overheard by accident, could cut so deep it would make me close the door on her for good. And that's where the story turns, because until that day, I thought endurance was the same thing as love. I thought staying silent was a form of patience. But I was wrong. Silence, in my case, was just the slow death of self-respect, and I didn't realize it until it was too late. Looking back now, I can see the pattern as clear as day, but when you're in the middle of it, you convince yourself it's just a phase, or worse, you convince yourself you're imagining it. The second year she forgot my birthday, I chalked it up to teenage busyness. I told myself that between school, friends, and splitting her time between two households, it was easy for dates to slip through the cracks. I even reminded myself that I hadn't been perfect at remembering every detail of her life either. But deep down, I knew it wasn't the same. I had never forgotten the moments that mattered to her, and here she was, letting mine vanish without a trace. I smoothed it over, smiled through it, and waited for next year to be different. Spoiler, it wasn't. By the third year, I stopped pretending I didn't notice. I would wake up on my birthday with this strange feeling in my chest, as if I were holding my breath without even realizing it. My phone would buzz occasionally, but it was never her. Friends from work might send a quick HBD text. Maybe a sibling would call, but from my own daughter? Nothing. Instead, around her stepdad's birthday, my phone would practically overheat from the sheer number of notifications I'd get from mutual friends tagging me in her posts about him. She'd write paragraphs for him, calling him dad, saying he was everything she could ever ask for. The posts were filled with photos of them laughing together, sometimes even with her arms slung around his shoulders, the kind of warmth I used to get from her when she was little. Those days, I would feel a hollow ache, like I was watching someone else live my role. The worst part wasn't even the absence of her acknowledgement, it was the contrast. The year I turned 50, I spent the day alone. I'd worked late the night before, so I took the morning slow, made myself coffee, and sat on the porch just listening to the quiet. No calls from her, no text, no visit. That afternoon, I opened Facebook to see her post about her stepdad. A collage of photos, balloons in the background, her grinning ear to ear, with a caption that read, "The best gift my mom ever gave me. Love you forever, Dad." She didn't even tag me in a single post that day. I remember closing my laptop, staring out at the empty street, and telling myself not to cry. But the tears came anyway, not loud or dramatic, just slow, heavy drops I wiped away before anyone could notice. Even when the fourth year came and went, I still didn't confront her. Maybe that makes me a coward, or maybe it makes me a parent who didn't want to risk losing what little connection we had left. I'd keep our conversations light, asking about her classes, her friends, her weekend plans. She'd answer distractedly, her eyes flicking to her phone every few seconds. Sometimes, mid-conversation, she'd start smiling at a text, and I knew, without asking, that it was either her mother or her stepdad. I told myself it was fine, that kids her age naturally gravitate toward the parent they see more often. But even that was a lie. I knew she was choosing him, and I was just the man she had to check in with out of obligation. The fifth year was the one that truly started to wear me down. I had stopped expecting a celebration of any kind, but I still hoped for a call. I didn't even get that. That night, after a long day at work, I opened Instagram out of habit and saw her story. Pictures from a fancy dinner with her mom and stepdad, all smiles and champagne. I didn't even have the energy to feel jealous anymore. It was more like resignation, like I'd been standing in the rain for years and finally stopped hoping for it to let up. I didn't message her, didn't call, didn't hint that she'd forgotten again. I simply went to bed. But the truth is, the silence between us was getting louder. Around that time, friends and family began to notice. My sister once asked me, "Don't you think it's weird she never mentions you online?" I laughed it off, saying, "We're just private." But inside it stung. I wanted to scream, "Yes, it's weird. Yes, it hurts. Yes, I feel like I'm being erased." But saying it out loud would make it real, and I wasn't ready to face that reality. Instead, I stayed quiet, hoping that if I just kept being there for her, she'd one day turn around and see me. I didn't realize I was holding onto a rope she'd already let go of. Then came the little moments that chipped away at me more than the birthdays themselves. Like the time she called me by my first name during a casual conversation, as if "Dad" had slipped from her vocabulary. Or the way she would tell stories that involved me, but frame them as if I were just a supporting character in her life, not one of the main ones. She never said anything outright cruel, not yet, but the undertone was there. I could feel it in the pauses, in the way her eyes would glaze over when I talked about the past, as if those memories belonged to someone else. Still, I told myself to be patient. I reminded myself of the years I had been her whole world, back when scraped knees and bedtime stories were enough to make her smile. I thought that maybe this was just the messy part of parenting a teenager, that once she grew up a bit, she'd circle back. I clung to that hope like a lifeline, even as the evidence stacked against it. The truth was, the foundation between us had been cracking for years, and I was the only one out there with a bucket of cement, trying to patch it up. She wasn't even looking at the damage. And so, I let the pattern continue. 5 years. 5 missed birthdays. 5 times watching her pour her love into another man and leave me with scraps. I told myself I could handle it, that I was strong enough to take it. But strength isn't about how much pain you can endure. It's about knowing when to stop letting yourself be hurt. And by the time year 6 rolled around, the damage was already done. All it took was one overheard sentence to break the dam completely. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon, one of those days that felt neither good nor bad, just ordinary. I had come home from work early, thinking I might surprise my daughter with takeout from her favorite Thai place. She was in the kitchen, leaning against the counter with her phone pressed to her ear, twirling the cord of her hoodie with one hand. I didn't announce myself right away. I just set the bag down on the dining table and started sorting through the mail. I caught snippets of her laughter, light and easy, the kind I hadn't heard directed at me in a long time. It was the kind of laughter you give someone you're genuinely happy to talk to. At first, I wasn't really listening. I knew she talked to her mom often, and I didn't want to eavesdrop like some insecure parent. But then her tone shifted, playful, but sharper, and I heard her say, "Honestly, I wish Dad wasn't in my life. Stepdad's an upgrade." The words landed in my ears before my brain had time to prepare for them. It was like someone had turned down the volume of the whole world, and all I could hear was my own pulse pounding in my head. She didn't say it in anger, not like it was part of a fight. No, she said it casually, like it was just a truth she'd always known. I froze in place, my hand still holding a piece of junk mail I hadn't even looked at. I stared at the wall, trying to decide if I'd really heard what I thought I heard. Maybe I'd misunderstood. Maybe she meant something else. But then she laughed again and followed it with, "Yeah, he tries, but it's just not the same. Stepdad gets me in a way he never will." There it was. No misunderstanding, no accidental phrasing. She was talking about me, stripping me down to nothing more than an unwanted placeholder in her life. My stomach twisted, and a heat rose in my chest. Not the kind of anger that makes you yell, but the kind that makes you go silent. I don't know how long I stood there before I finally moved. I didn't barge in right away. I waited for her to finish her call, giving myself time to let the words settle. The truth is, I wasn't deciding whether I was hurt. I knew I was hurt. I was deciding what that hurt meant for the rest of my life. In those minutes, I replayed the past 5 years in my head. The forgotten birthdays, the stepdad tributes, the hollow conversations. I realized that I had been living in a fantasy, hoping she'd one day come back to me emotionally. But that phone call was the reality check I couldn't ignore. When she hung up, she walked into the dining room and saw me standing there. Her eyes flicked to the bag of Thai food, and she smiled. "Oh, you got dinner. Thanks, Dad." The word dad sounded so light, so automatic, but it hit me like an insult after what I'd just heard. I didn't respond right away. I just looked at her, really looked at her, not as my little girl, not as the child I'd raised, but as someone who had just told another person the world would be better without me in it. I felt something inside me click into place, like a door locking from the inside. "I heard what you said," I told her, my voice low but steady. She froze, her smile faltering. "What?" she asked, trying to play it off. I stepped closer. "You said you wish I wasn't in your life. That your stepdad is an upgrade." I heard every word. She shifted uncomfortably, rolling her eyes like I was making too big a deal out of nothing. "I was just talking," she said, her voice defensive now. "You're overreacting." The casual dismissal stung almost more than the words themselves. That was the moment I knew. She didn't even feel guilty. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I told her, "You've been walking on my heart for years, and today, you stomped on it. I've done everything I could to be in your life, and you've made it clear you don't want me there. So I won't be." Her eyes widened a little, but she didn't say she was sorry. She didn't beg me to reconsider. She just crossed her arms and said, "So what? You're cutting me off?" That's real mature. It wasn't anger in her tone. It was almost boredom, as if she'd been expecting me to reach this breaking point eventually. That made my decision even easier. "Pack your things," I said, my voice like steel. "From this moment forward, you are no longer my responsibility. You wanted a life without me? You've got it." She blinked, probably trying to decide if I was bluffing. But when I stood there, arms folded, unmoving, she realized I meant it. She went upstairs without a word. I stayed in the dining room, staring at the takeout bag on the table. The smell of her favorite dish, pad cew, suddenly made me nauseous. It was supposed to be a meal we'd share. Now it was just a reminder that even my small gestures didn't mean anything to her. It didn't take her long to come back down with a duffel bag slung over her shoulder. She didn't cry. She didn't hug me. She didn't even say goodbye. She just walked past me and out the front door. I didn't follow her. I didn't watch her drive away. I just stood there, listening to the sound of the door closing, and felt a strange calm settle over me. For years, I'd been terrified of losing her. In that moment, I realized I already had. The only thing left to do was accept it. That night, I sat in the quiet of my living room, the half-eaten takeout container sitting cold on the table. I didn't feel the way I thought I would. There was no rush of regret, no second-guessing. Just a heavy certainty that I had done the only thing I could to protect what little self-respect I had left. Parents aren't supposed to give up on their kids, I know that. But what no one tells you is that kids can give up on their parents too, and when they do, you have a choice. You can keep chasing after them, begging for scraps of affection, or you can walk away with your dignity intact. And so, in the quiet of that Tuesday night, I made a promise to myself. No more chasing. No more hoping for a version of her that didn't exist anymore. She'd made her choice, and I'd made mine. I didn't know what the future would hold, but I knew one thing. From that moment forward, she was no longer my daughter. The air in the house felt heavier after I told her to pack her things. She moved upstairs with quick, stomping steps, and I stayed in the dining room, staring at the unopened takeout bag. It felt surreal that 30 minutes earlier I'd been excited to share a meal with my daughter, and now I was listening to drawers slam shut as she threw her belongings into a bag. Part of me expected her to come back down in tears, to say she didn't mean it, that she was angry or just talking nonsense to her mom. But the deeper part of me, the one that had been quietly cataloging every forgotten birthday and every social media tribute to her stepdad, knew that moment wasn't coming. I realized I was done waiting for her to turn back toward me. When she finally came down, she had a single duffel bag slung over her shoulder, her hair tied back hastily, and her phone clutched in one hand like a lifeline. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked at me, but her eyes didn't carry any softness. "So that's it?" she asked. "You're just done?" I could hear the disbelief in her tone, but it wasn't the kind that came from heartbreak. It was the kind that came from shock that I'd actually followed through. "No," I said evenly, "you're done. You've made it clear for years where I stand in your life, and today you confirmed it. I'm not holding on to someone who doesn't want to be here." She gave a bitter laugh, shaking her head like I was being absurd. "God, you're so dramatic." I was joking. I stared at her, letting the silence stretch until she realized I wasn't buying it. "I've been a joke to you for a long time, apparently," I said, my voice low but steady. "You talk about him like he's the only dad you've ever had, and you erase me in every way that matters. And now I hear you wish I wasn't in your life at all. That's not a joke. That's the truth you've been living." She rolled her eyes again, an old habit of hers when she didn't want to admit she was wrong. "Whatever," she said, hoisting the bag higher on her shoulder. "You want me gone? Fine. I'll go stay with people who actually care." That word, people, stung more than I expected. I had spent years showing up for her, and in her mind, I was just another body she could replace. She walked toward the door, but I wasn't done. "You don't get to rewrite this later," I said sharply. "You don't get to come back in a month pretending none of this happened. When you walk out that door, you're making a choice, your choice." She stopped, hand on the doorknob, and looked back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. It wasn't regret. It wasn't even anger. It was something colder, like indifference. "Guess that makes two of us," she said flatly. And just like that, she turned the knob and stepped outside. The click of the door closing behind her echoed in the silence, a sound I felt deep in my chest. I didn't follow her. I didn't watch her drive away. Instead, I went to the kitchen and opened the takeout bag, pulling out the 2 containers of food I'd ordered. I sat at the table and started eating, not because I was hungry, but because I needed to do something with my hands. The pad CEW was still warm, but it tasted like cardboard. Every bite reminded me that I had bought it for someone who had just wished me out of her life. I forced myself to finish, as if completing the meal would somehow help me complete the severing of ties. But the truth was, there was no clean break. Even as I sat there, my chest felt heavy with years of investment suddenly written off. Later that night, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from my sister. "Just saw your daughter's post. Everything okay?" My stomach sank as I opened Instagram. Sure enough, she had already posted a selfie with her stepdad, captioned, "Home is where the heart is. Thankful for the people who truly love me." The timestamp told me she'd posted it less than 10 minutes after leaving my house. It wasn't just a move to leave. She wanted the world to know where her loyalty lay. And maybe, in some twisted way, she wanted me to see it. I closed the app and tossed my phone on the couch, refusing to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. The rest of the evening passed in a haze. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't call anyone to explain what had happened. I just sat in the quiet, replaying the scene in my head over and over. Every time I thought about it, my mind tried to insert an alternate ending, one where she apologized, where she stayed, where we talked it out. But that wasn't reality. The reality was that she had chosen, and so had I. And while part of me felt like I should be devastated, another part felt lighter than it had in years. It was the relief of finally setting down a burden I'd been carrying long after my strength had run out. I knew people would judge me. I knew there would be whispers from extended family, accusations that I was a bad father, that I had abandoned my own child. But I also knew those people hadn't lived the last 5 years in my shoes. They hadn't watched the slow erosion of a bond they once thought unbreakable. They hadn't felt the sting of being replaced in someone's heart while still sitting across the dinner table from them. And they certainly hadn't heard the words I heard that afternoon. Words like that don't just fade. They carve themselves into you. And the only way to stop feeling them is to stop letting the person who said them into your life. By the time I went to bed that night, my decision was cemented. There would be no reaching out, no mending fences. I wasn't going to chase someone who had made it clear they didn't value me. Blood or not, a relationship without respect is nothing more than an arrangement. And I was done making arrangements for someone who couldn't even remember my birthday, let alone see my worth. As I turned off the light, I felt a strange, quiet peace settle over me. The house was emptier than it had been in years, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like my space again. The first week after she left was the quietest my house had been in years. At first, it was jarring. No footsteps rushing down the stairs, no doors slamming in a teenage mood, no faint sound of music seeping from under her bedroom door. Just silence. The kind that doesn't just fill a room, but seeps into your bones. I thought it would hurt more than it did. Instead, I felt a strange calm, like I'd finally stopped waiting for a storm that never ended. I could make coffee in the morning without wondering if today would be the day she'd throw another casual reminder that her stepdad was better at being a parent. My mornings became mine again. That's not to say people didn't have opinions. Oh, they had plenty. My sister called me 3 days later, her voice heavy with judgment. "I can't believe you told your own daughter to leave," she said. "She's young. She doesn't know how her words affect people." I let her talk, let her pour her moral outrage over the phone, and when she finally stopped, I told her the truth. She's not a little girl anymore. She's old enough to know when she's being cruel, and I'm old enough to know when to stop letting it happen. There was a pause on the other end, a silence that told me she didn't agree but didn't have a comeback either. That became the theme, people not understanding but also not living my reality. Her absence didn't just change the atmosphere. It changed my routines. I stopped checking social media as much. I didn't want to see her posts, didn't want to dissect every caption for hidden jabs. I canceled my subscription to the streaming service we'd shared and took her profile off my accounts. It wasn't about being petty. It was about reclaiming the parts of my life I'd let her occupy without appreciation. The space she left in the house began to feel less like a wound and more like breathing room. I could sit in my own living room without the tension of waiting for a conversation to go sideways. I could enjoy the quiet without feeling guilty about it. About 2 months after she left, I met someone. It wasn't planned. I wasn't looking. I was at the hardware store picking up supplies for a project when I ran into a woman named Claire. We started talking about Woodstein, of all things, and somehow ended up getting coffee later that week. From the start, she treated me differently. Not in some grand, sweeping way, but in the small consistencies. She listened when I talked, remembered details, asked follow-up questions weeks later. She made a point to know the things that mattered to me. And when my birthday rolled around that year, she didn't just remember, she planned an entire day around it. No fanfare for the internet, no performative posts, just a celebration because she genuinely wanted to make me feel valued. Being with Claire made me realize how much I'd been running on empty before. With my daughter, I'd been giving endlessly and receiving crumbs, telling myself that was just the way it was supposed to be. But with Claire, it was mutual. She didn't make me feel like I was competing for her attention or affection. I didn't have to earn my place every day. It was simply mine. That was a revelation. I had spent years thinking love was something you had to fight for to prove you were worthy of it. Now I understood that real love doesn't make you beg. Of course, not everyone saw it that way. Some family members treated my happiness like it was built on betrayal. At a holiday gathering, a cousin leaned over and said in a low voice, "So you've just replaced your daughter with a girlfriend?" I took a slow sip of my drink before answering. "No," I said, "I've replaced neglect with love. There's a difference." He didn't say much after that, but I could feel his disapproval from across the room. It didn't matter. The older I get, the more I realize you can't live your life by other people's expectations, especially when those people haven't walked through the fire you've been through. Claire and I built a life that felt stable in a way I hadn't felt in years. We cooked together, went on weekend drives, sat in the backyard with coffee in the mornings. There was no tension, no underlying current of resentment, no waiting for the next backhanded comment. It was peaceful, and I guarded that peace fiercely. I didn't want my daughter's absence to be a constant wound, but I also didn't want her presence, under the conditions she'd set, to come back and poison what I had rebuilt. Boundaries aren't walls to keep love out. They're gates to make sure only the right kind of love gets in. Sometimes, late at night, I would think about her. Not with anger, but with a kind of distant sadness. I wondered if she ever thought about me, if she ever regretted what she'd said. Maybe she did. Maybe she didn't. The thing is, it didn't matter anymore. I had finally accepted that I couldn't make her see my value. That was her work to do, not mine. My job was to protect my peace and the life I'd built with someone who actually cherished me. And in that way, letting her go had been the most loving thing I could do for myself. By the end of that year, the house didn't feel like a place missing someone anymore. It felt like home again. There was laughter in the kitchen, music in the evenings, conversations that didn't leave me feeling small. I wasn't walking on eggshells, waiting for affection that might never come. And while I knew people still whispered about the choice I'd made, I stopped caring. The truth was simple. You don't have to keep someone in your life just because you share DNA. Love is measured in actions, not in titles. And I finally had the kind of love I didn't have to doubt. It's been years since that Tuesday afternoon, and I can still remember the exact tone of her voice when she said I was better off gone. Not because I replay it every day. I don't. But because it was the moment the illusion finally broke. For years, I had been trying to convince myself that the girl I raised was still in there somewhere, buried under teenage moods, outside influences, and the novelty of a stepdad. But the truth is, she had been drifting for a long time. That one sentence was just the confirmation I'd been too afraid to admit to myself. And when you finally see something clearly, you can't unsee it. The hardest part about letting her go wasn't the initial break. It was living with the silence afterward. There's an ache that comes from knowing your child exists out there in the world, laughing and living, without you in it. It's not like losing someone to death, where grief has a clear shape and an eventual resting place. This is an open-ended loss, the kind where the person is still alive, but the relationship is not. People assume that because I was the one who told her to leave, I somehow don't feel the absence. That couldn't be further from the truth. You can miss someone and still know they're not good for you. Over time, the ache dulled, replaced by a steadier kind of acceptance. I stopped waiting for an apology that might never come. I stopped wondering if she'd send a birthday card or show up on my doorstep with tears in her eyes. I made peace with the fact that some doors, once closed, are better left that way. That peace didn't come from bitterness. It came from the realization that loving someone doesn't mean allowing them to hurt you endlessly. Boundaries don't mean you don't care. They mean you care enough about yourself to stop tolerating harm. Claire once asked me if I would ever let my daughter back into my life. We were sitting on the back porch, the sun setting, coffee mugs in our hands. I thought about it for a long moment before answering. Maybe, I said, but only if she walked through the door with respect first. Love alone isn't enough anymore. Claire nodded, not pushing for more. That's one of the things I love about her. She doesn't try to fix my decisions or smooth over the rough edges. She understands that some scars are better left visible as reminders of what you've survived. There are days when I still scroll through old photos, birthday parties, school plays, vacations where she rode on my shoulders because she was too tired to walk. I let myself feel the warmth of those memories without letting them trick me into rewriting the ending. Those moments were real, and so is the reality that followed. It's not all or nothing. You can acknowledge the good without pretending the bad didn't happen. The trick is not letting nostalgia convince you to reopen a door that will only lead you back into the same pain. If I'm being honest, the biggest change since she's been gone isn't just the absence of her presence. It's the presence of peace. The constant undercurrent of tension, the sharp edge of disrespect in her tone, the feeling that I had to earn her affection every single day, that's all gone. I don't wake up wondering what mood she'll be in or whether I'll be compared to someone else. I wake up next to a woman who loves me without keeping score, who values me without competition. That's not a small thing. That's everything. People still judge me, and I've learned to live with that. They say things like, "But she's your daughter," as if biology alone is enough to excuse years of neglect and cruelty. I used to try to explain, to make them understand the depth of the hurt and the years it took to get here. I don't bother anymore. Not everyone is meant to understand your decisions, especially when they've never been faced with the same ones. What matters is that I understand why I made mine, and I can live with it. That's all that counts. Every so often, I hear through the grapevine that she's doing well, graduated, got a job, maybe even engaged. I don't dig for details, and I don't pretend those updates don't stir something inside me. But whatever that feeling is, it's not enough to undo the choice I made. Because here's the truth. A father's love can be endless, but it cannot be unconditional, not when respect is buried 6 feet deep. Love without respect is just tolerance, and I've stopped tolerating being treated like a footnote in my own child's life. I don't know if she'll ever see things differently. Maybe one day she'll understand the weight of her words and the years of choices that led here. Or maybe she won't. Either way, my life is no longer on hold waiting for her to figure it out. I'm living, and I'm loved. That's more than enough. And if the price for that peace was closing the door on my own daughter, then it's a price I'm willing to keep paying. Because the alternative, staying in a relationship where I was undervalued and unseen, was no longer an option I could afford. Sometimes the hardest decision you'll ever make is the one people will never forgive you for. I chose my peace over my role, my self-respect over my title as dad. Was it the right call? I believe it was, but what do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to choose yourself, even when it's painful. See you soon in the next story.